Welcome everyone to our third capstone presentation of the 2022 capstone season. I'm thrilled to introduce Weiss, who will be speaking to us about French architecture and sustainability. And if you weren't here for the first one, we'll take some questions at the end. Once Eden is finished, I'll start with a question and then I'll open it up to the group if you have questions to ask of her. Really proud of the work that she's done. So Eden, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Eden. I want to thank you all for coming to my presentation. I'd like to begin my capstone by backtracking 5 years. It was my 12th birthday, and I was boarding a train from London to Paris. As soon as I walked the Rue Cambon, I fell in love. From the Eiffel Tower to Crêperie Gigi to the Louvre, what I experienced on my trip transformed my life to this day. Once I came to Rani in 6th grade, I knew which language I had to select to study. Throughout the years, I loved getting to know other aspects of French culture I had yet to learn about. Female French Impressionist artists, street art, cuisine, music, the list goes on. I finished taking French junior year. Although I could no longer learn in the classroom, I looked for ways to continue to immerse myself in the culture. Once I received an email for students interested in capstone senior year, I realized I wanted to do something French related that I didn't have much experience in yet. Also, I wanted to tie in a sustainability component to my project following my Global Citizens class sophomore year. So I decided on French architecture and sustainability. I'd like to thank all the support I've had throughout this process. Dr. Delgado for helping me discover sustainable developments in France today, Madame Krakowski for promoting my intellectual curiosity in the French culture, and Dr. Martin for the tremendous help with my research paper and always sending over interesting articles he'd find. Throughout my presentation, I'll be going chronologically, discussing each architectural style in France from Roman to modern times. Eventually, I'll dive deeper into the future of sustainable architecture. Following prehistoric architecture, the earliest form of buildings to reach France were those of Roman construction. After the Romans conquered Gaul in the Gallic Wars, the Romans ruled over Gaul, which is present-day France. Rome controlled the region for the following 5 centuries until the Roman Empire itself collapsed. So, while in power over the area, the Romans left landmarks in France still present today. Roman architects had 2 goals: to demonstrate the power of Rome and to improve the lives of citizens in a developing world. To maintain efficiency and order in early civilizations, the Romans designed numerous aqueducts, bridges, and roads. Greek architecture and Egyptian pyramid architecture make up the majority of its influences. The major material used to make these early structures was concrete. Its strength, flexibility, convenience, and low cost allowed domes and vaults to be built with ease. There are 3 main styles of Roman architecture that are based on Greek column categories. Doric architecture set the standards of beauty and harmony. Ionic architecture is known for its use of volutes, and Corinthian architecture incorporates ornate and lavish designs resembling leaves and flowers. One of the most well-known Roman architectural feats is the Pont du Gard, located on the Gardon River. The Pont du Gard is an aqueduct, which means it transports water from springs. The Romans knew how the geometry of a pipe would affect the velocity of water flowing through. The accuracy of their technique is even praised by today's standards. After the Roman Empire fell, the use of the aqueduct as a mode of transport was non-existent. However, the Pont du Gard remained useful as a bridge and was kept as an influence for learning and entertainment. Following Roman architecture came Romanesque developments, and although the latter may sound a lot like the former, its characteristics are quite different. Romanesque architecture was prominent in Europe from the mid-11th century to the advent of the Gothic style. Roman, Byzantine, and Etonian traditions fused together to create this architectural style. Larger churches were needed to support an increase in monkhood throughout populations, so Romanesque architecture also branched out into the political sphere as internal clashes such as the Crusades were taking place at the time. 3 most defining features of Romanesque-style architecture are its imposing size, cathedral floor plans, and vaulting arches. Towers with spires that reach towards the clouds and buttresses that extend off walls to give them more girth are frequent features in churches and cathedrals of this period. Furthermore, these massive buildings contrast the small stained glass windows and accents found on the exteriors. When building the churches of this medieval period, floor plans revealed an aerial view of the cathedrals in the shape of a Latin cross. Additionally, a way to distinguish between Romanesque and Gothic architecture would be through the former's rounded arches. Semicircular arches placed next to each other enclose the long hallways of Romanesque buildings. The Fontenay Abbey in Burgundy is the best preserved and oldest monastery of the Cistercian order in the Middle Ages. Although only 215 feet long, the abbey remains in the shape of a Latin cross. The architectural proportions of the Fontenay were so carefully designed that they enhanced chanting and musical harmony during services. The abbey mirrors the inspirations of Romanesque architects of the time: simplicity, rounded arches, and increased faith. Gothic architecture dominated Europe from the mid-12th century to the 16th century. Gothic architecture was the greatest transition from the more simplistic styles. From 1000 to 1400, several significant churches and cathedrals were built that allowed architects to test their creative, complex, and daring designs. The most notable characteristic of Gothic architecture was the pointed arch, which was borrowed from Islamic Spain. The pointed arch allowed for a daunting look, but also relieved stress on other structural elements. Columns were now built skinnier as they had to support less, and with skinnier columns came more room for windows. Also, vaulting and ornamentation became more complex with intricate designs in the stonework around windows. Gothic architecture became more complex with intricate designs in stonework around windows. While earlier periods focused on architecture for the purpose of usefulness, with new skill sets and resources, Gothic architects were able to create ornate structures with designs never before seen. Chartres Cathedral, located in Chartres, France, is considered the perfect Gothic cathedral. Built in 1194 in honor of the Virgin Mary, the cathedral holds the most medieval stained glass and sculptures and is one of the largest Gothic churches. Adhering to Gothic traditions, the cathedral is characterized by a longitudinal body with a nave and 2 aisles and an elevation on 3 levels. The most notable Gothic element of the Chartres Cathedral is its use of flying buttresses. A flying buttress is an inclined bar supported by an arch that extends off the upper part of a wall to a pier. Flying buttresses were commonly used in Gothic cathedrals so that they could be built high and incorporate many windows. The Chartres Cathedral was able to maintain its pristine over the years. With its stained glass, religious sculptures, spires, and flying buttresses, the Chartres Cathedral was and remains the true embodiment of Gothic architecture. What do you think of when you hear the word Renaissance? You may be reminded of some sort of new era. The phrase Renaissance man can sound familiar to you. However, in reality, the Renaissance was a return back to classical ways. From the 14th to 17th centuries, European states rediscovered Greek and Roman philosophy, literature, and art. While the Middle Ages were dark and declining, Renaissance thinkers introduced new ideas to uplift society. Secularist thought, increased education, and emphasized human achievement now surrounded daily life. This architectural style lasted from 1400 to 1600 and was divided into 3 subperiods: the early Renaissance in 1400, the high Renaissance in 1500, and the late Renaissance in the 1520s. The first point of study for Renaissance architects was Greco-Roman ruins. Inspiration was also drawn from Byzantine and Roman styles. However, Gothic architecture was never reflected in Renaissance work. Architects saw Gothic architecture as invasive and untraditional. Furthermore, with the help of the printing press, On Architecture by Vitruvius became the Bible for Renaissance architects. Emphasis on symmetry, mathematical ratios, and personal experience were highlights of the book that were reflected in Renaissance buildings. The Château de Chambord is an example of French Renaissance architecture that was originally built as a hunting lodge for King Francis I. One clear architectural element inspired by Da Vinci is the iconic central staircase. His double helix, or DNA staircase, is a well-known design idea that has implications outside of the chateau. Furthermore, the entire layout of the central building replicates a Greek cross, with each arm being precisely twice its width. The interior is symmetrically divided into 4 parts. Although the exact identity of the architect remains unknown, the Château de Chambord is undeniably an exceptional achievement inspired by the work of Leonardo da Vinci. In general, Baroque architecture evolved in response to a tumultuous period that began in the 16th century. Those in power wanted to use architecture and art as a way to exhibit strength, wealth, and prominence. Nowhere is this more prominent than in the Catholic Church's response to the Protestant Reformation. For the Catholic Church, the most significant way to retain its influence was to produce grandiose structures and cathedrals. Commissioned artists and architects began to revive Renaissance notions of beauty and realism, only this time in an even more ornate and extravagant fashion. The main idea behind the Baroque period is the stimulation of the emotions and senses. Because the Reformation promoted a rationalized and austere image, the Catholic Church responded by taking the opposite approach. This is why every form and shape from a Baroque building targets the engagement of senses and ignites emotions. Engaging with the viewer's emotions is no easy feat. Therefore, architectural plans tend to rely on complex shapes, often an oval base with various oppositions of materials and forms that give the building a dynamic aspect. The combination of different spaces is a favorite way of emphasizing motion and sensuality. If the feeling of a building is grand, dramatic, full of contrasting surfaces, a multitude of curves, twists, and gilded statuary, it's likely a Baroque building. The interior, in most cases, has a ceiling that is heavily painted, making the viewer believe that there is actually no ceiling, but the roof is connected to the outside world or some divine realm. The Palace of Versailles is a magnificent example of French Baroque architecture. The gigantic scale of Versailles exemplifies the architectural theme of creation by division, a series of simple repetitions rhythmically marked off by the repetition of large windows, which expresses the fundamental values of Baroque art and in which the focal point of the interior, as well as the entire building, is the King's Bed. Among its celebrated architectural designs is the Hall of Mirrors, which is one of the most famous rooms in the world. From 1682 to the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789, the Palace of Versailles housed the king and the entire French royal court, a sum of 3,000 residents, making it a symbol of absolutism and decadence of the royal monarchy. Haussmann architecture refers to the quintessential Parisian style of 19th century architecture that still defines Paris. The history of Haussmann architecture began with Napoleon III's desire to take Paris from a ramshackle medieval city plagued with overcrowding and disease to a cohesive modern city full of light and air. He appointed George Eugene Haussmann, a city perfect but not an architect, who oversaw the radical reimaging of Paris from 1853 to 1870. To realize Napoleon's vision, Haussmann bulldozed cramped, winding streets lined with snug medieval buildings and created straight, broad boulevards and avenues lined with block after block of sober, elegant stone apartment buildings that redefined the look of Paris. The renovation also included new parks and squares, kiosks, street lamps, and the modernization of the city's water sewage system. This era can be seen as one of the first modernizations in Paris's urban planning. Some characteristics of Haussmann's style include large, elegant, imposing buildings that vary slightly in size and details but share common characteristics, stone facades, plain or ornamental black wrought iron and window grills and balconies, chimneys that were originally used for heating and now symbolize the iconic rooftops of Paris, dormer windows on top floor room attics, French double windows, large single or double wooden entry doors, and in many buildings, stone paved carriage entrances that lead to a central courtyard. The dawn of modern architecture came at a time when hand-labored craftsmanship was being replaced with machine-made industrialization. Modern architects worked to reinvent ways of building that focus more on how humans live versus what they found beautiful. This architecture is not sentimental like revivalist styles. Instead, it is innovative, experimental, and minimal. The birth of modern design came with the thought that form should follow function. This idea started with architect Louis Sullivan, who designed buildings for the 1893 Chicago World Fair. That mantra became the foundation for modern architects. In general, the most well-known examples of modern architecture end around the mid-20th century, but the design style still influences buildings well into the 20th century. Since there are so many styles of modern architecture, there are several defining characteristics. These are some more common broad key features that can be seen across many different forms. Clean, minimal lines, walls of glass and large windows, open and well-defined floor plans, use of newer materials such as steel, iron, and glass, a relationship with the outside environment, and asymmetrical features. Le Centre Pompidou is a modern building in Paris that houses a national modern art gallery, a library, and other cultural performances and events. The building's exterior has a large rectangular superstructure made of steel and glass. Le Centre Pompidou has a rectangular prism shape made out of glass paneling and steel pipes that form an exoskeleton for the building. Additionally, all the building's functional features, air conditioning, electricity, water, lifts, and escalators, are revealed on the exterior of the building through color-coded pipes for ease of maintenance. The highlight of the building's exterior is known as the Caterpillar, which is a long escalator tube cutting diagonally across the building's facade from the bottom floor to the top. This simple geometric anomaly gives the industrial complexity of the building's exterior a clear focal point. The building opened in 1977, and major renovations began that year and didn't finish until 2000. Sustainable architecture refers to buildings and designs that have limited environmental impact with goals of improved living conditions for inhabitants, low costs, and positive impacts on health. With the use of appropriate technology, customer requests are satisfied through efficiently planned layouts and reusable resources. Also referred to as green architecture, sustainable architecture challenges architects to generate smart designs that produce minimal harmful effects on the ecosystem and community. In 2015, the United States Green Building Council shared its international rankings of the top 10 countries for LEED, which is the world's most used green building ranking system. France was not among this list. Although France took early steps in promoting efficiently planned cities under Napoleon and Haussmann, in the modern world, their foot in the realm of sustainability is nothing compared to other countries in Asia and Europe. However, France has taken some steps to become greener. The French government has initiated some change. They announced plans for a sustainability law that will be implemented this year. With this law, all buildings financed by the French state will be built by means of at least 50% timber or other bio-based materials. Bio-based materials include matter derived from living organisms such as hemp and straw. Furthermore, Anne Hidalgo, who's the mayor of Paris, plans to implement urban forests around architectural landmarks. French architects are also looking for ways to incorporate green buildings into their designs. Edward Francois is a French architect who is known for sustainable development, incorporation of plant life into buildings, and preservation of historic sites. Francois's Planted Tower in Nantes is just one of his many projects that embodies sustainability, as its exterior includes a vertical exhibition of plants that capture carbon from the Botanical Garden of Nantes. That being said, in France, it has come down to an ultimatum of creating sustainable developments or preserving history. Since French officials frequently choose the latter, this is why there is a sense of backwardness when it comes to eco-friendly building and planning in France. There are ways that France and countries with similar hesitations can become more involved in the domain of sustainability in terms of architecture and city planning. With an increase in green building, nations can achieve a range of global goals such as addressing climate change, creating sustainable and thriving communities, and driving economic growth. A smaller scale option of beginning to build greener would be to look for inspiration from existing sustainable home projects. Michael Reynolds, also known as the Garbage Warrior, is an architect based out of New Mexico who has developed sustainable building communities around the world for commercial, personal, and government use. These communities are made up of earthships, which are homes built with recycled materials with energy conservation in mind. The earthships produce electricity, water, and food for their own use. One way to encourage green building in the future and to understand concepts of green building would be by promoting green building literacy and STEM programs throughout schooling. Although green building is becoming increasingly popular in a modern world, specialty in green building still remains in the domain of building professionals instead of specialized groups of green builders. To facilitate enlarged groups of green builders in their respective domain, expanding green building education can promote a growing field of sustainable building in the future as compared to traditional constructions. The future of green building technology is full of opportunities for us to undo some of the harm we have inflicted upon the environment. The green building materials market is expected to be more than $254 billion in 2023, according to Navigant Research. Timothy C. Mack of AAI Foresight predicts the future of green building materials will hold air cleaning materials, microgrids, net zero buildings, and smart glass. The green building technology advances that occur in the next 5 to 10 years will steer the future course of green building. The focus must be on making real changes in how we design and construct buildings in the future. Advances such as air cleaning materials will make our indoor and outdoor environments healthier. Although aspects of preservation of tradition may halt the modernization of buildings sustainably, the benefits of green architecture and planning outweigh the cons. As motivating factors, positive rewards such as economic growth, an abundance of job opportunities, and reduction of harmful gas emissions will result from transitioning into the world of sustainability. We must all do our part in making a greener world. Thank you for listening.
Well done, Eden. Congratulations. Really a great talk. Proud of the work that you did. It's a year's worth of a deep dive into something that's critical for the human experience. So the first question I have for you is, Hatham spoke to us about optimization and constraints and limitations. What are some of the limitations of green building and green architecture?
So yeah, although green building does have many advantages, there are a few things that make governments, people, and nations more hesitant to transition into the realm. One reason could be initial startup costs tend to be more expensive than traditional constructions. So that first jump into the realm might be more difficult because countries can be more hesitant to spend the money. Also, green building tends to rely on sun, and it does matter where location is, because if people are building vertical gardens or greenery around buildings, sunlight and solar power is necessary. So obviously colder areas or areas that get limited sunlight throughout the year will have a harder time building green. Also, green buildings can take a lot longer to build than regular structures, averaging around like 3 years. But other than that, the pros of green building definitely outweigh the cons. Those are just some initial hurdles to jump over.
Thank you. Other questions? Hazel?
Thanks. You did such a good job.
Thanks.
So in the early periods, you talk about Romanesque and Gothic and Renaissance styles of French art, and how they weren't as sustainable, obviously, as modern French architecture. Do you think there's ever a possibility for modern day France to return or reimagine those classic styles in a way that's sustainable?
Yeah, I think they can, but it's definitely hard. As I said before, they're kind of more into preserving classical styles of architecture than diving into the modern realm. During my research, I found an article about the rebuilding of Notre Dame after the fire, and during the rebuilding, there was controversy among people of whether or not they should change certain parts of the building process to make it more sustainable or keep the traditional Gothic style that they know and love. And they ultimately decided on keeping the traditional architectural style. But because of that, over 1,000 trees were cut down and 200 forests to build the wooden bases for the spires and transepts. And the spires are being built out of toxic lead. So it's definitely hard for them to transition to building green. Hopefully there are some ways they can while still preserving the architecture they know and love, maybe doing like internal things, keeping maintenance budgets low, preserving resources on the inside. But on the outside of these buildings as a whole, they're more concerned with preserving those classic styles of architecture, sadly.
I have a question about the building materials. So from back then to now, have they changed over time a lot, or are they similar?
So starting with the Bronze Age, which is before I started my presentation in the Roman period, the Bronze Age frequently used stones to build monuments. That could be seen in Stonehenge in England. And then once we got to Roman periods, concrete and bricks were commonly used. Concrete was durable, strong, easy to make, and was able to hold bricks in place. And then following that, in the Middle Ages, there was a return back to stone. And then following that in the Renaissance, there was a return back to brick and concrete. And then eventually, following the Industrial Revolution, iron, metals, glasses were used to build modern buildings. And now with sustainable architecture, wood and concrete and clay are being used, but you definitely see a revival of the classical elements used to design buildings. We still use stone, wood, bricks, concrete today, so none of it went away.
Thank you. Other questions? Oh, Addie in the back. Sorry to have to run this mic around, but people at home won't be able to hear it unless we use the mic.
Thank you. Great job, Eden. This seems like
Thanks.
something you're clearly very passionate about and interested in and very knowledgeable. I'm curious whether this is something that you want to pursue in college, whether the research or if you're going to pursue any of these subject areas.
Yeah, in college, I'm planning on majoring in French, so I'm definitely going to dive more into other aspects of research I've yet to learn about. I'm definitely going to still learn more about architecture, but in my research, I became pretty passionate about urban planning after I learned about Haussmann's remodeling of Paris. So I think that's an aspect other than architecture that I'd be interested in learning more about and doing more intense research on in college.
Thank you. One last question for Eden, anyone? Rishi.
Hi, Eden. Great job again.
Thank you.
And so when I was researching my topic, I wanted to go into like researching about smart homes and possibly saving the environment using smart homes. So did you research anything like that when you were researching this topic?
Smart homes?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I talked about before Michael Reynolds, the garbage warrior. He started building these earthships in New Mexico, and I'm pretty sure they have locations all around the world, but they basically conserve resources and make energy for their own use. You can rent them, buy them, or visit them. There's like a museum. But there's definitely a lot of work to be done in sustainable home development, because other than that, I didn't see much in cities at least, or urban areas. It was more in like desolate areas like deserts that homes could use solar power. So like I said, that's another limit of sustainable building. The use of sun is necessary for solar power and keeping these homes alive.
Thank you. Everyone, another round of applause for both Hatham and Eden. Really well done. I'm
Thank
proud of
you.
you guys and the hard work that you did. It was wonderful, and we learned a lot. One of the great benefits of being an educator is you have great hope for the future because our students do such wonderful things. Hatham, with your talk about optimization and minimizing costs. Eden, with your talk about preserving both French history and culture and an attempt to save the planet. Don't forget that 11:45, we'll hear from Brielle, who's going to do a table reading of her play Commedia dell'arte, which is about cancel culture. And then at 3 o'clock, Rishi is going to be talking about sustainable transportation modes. So again, all four of these topics today are just wonderful in terms of what the future holds for us as a people. So for you guys that are doing hard work in the present that prepares us for the future, thank you so much for what you're doing for all of us and making up for the mistakes that I and my generation have made. Did a great job. Congratulations. Don't forget about our next two this afternoon, 11:45 for Brielle and 3 o'clock for Rishi. Have a great day, everyone. Congratulations.